All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. I want to begin by thanking our sponsors. I thank Dovi and Nina Elman, our Talmud Torah sponsors for Teves, for dedicating all the Shiurim and Drushos this month in honor of their daughter Ayelet becoming a Bas Mitzvah. May she continue to be a source of nachas for the entire mishpacha. We thank our Daf Yomi sponsors, Eli and Judy Ben Zev, for the yard site of Eli's mother, Chana Devora, Bas Harav Binyamin Zev. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. And we thank the Meirowitz mishpacha for dedicating Daf Yomi today as a zechus for the refuah shlema of Shulamis Tova Bas Mindel. We hope that she, together with Kol Cholei Yisrael, will have a complete and enduring refuah. And I will say with that, let us begin. So a lot of very interesting Gemara we're picking up. Today's daf is Nun Beis 52. And we are picking up Emeretz Hashem V'Shatov V'Mitzlachas on Nun Aleph Amud Beis, last two lines. Amalei Rav Safra l'Rabbi Abba. So remember again, we are in really the fascinating topic of Minhag HaMakom. So we've seen a couple of different examples of this. We saw ultimately again so now we're into the Mishnah's last case, right? So the Mishnah's last case was, remember the Mishnah discussed about doing work before Chatzos on Erev Pesach. So the Mishnah indicated to us that this seems to be a topic of minhag. After it seems to be from the Mishnah. Though again, we'll discuss. After Chatzos, no malacha. Before Chatzos seems to be. Before Chatzos seems to be an element of minhag. So again, the Mishnah discusses if you go from a place where there's one type of minhag to a place where there's a different type of minhag. Essentially, again, whenever you travel from point A to point B, or city A to city B, and there are two different minhagim, the approach is noslin alav chumrei hamakom. You get the chumras of the place where you came from, and chumras of the place where you are. So we'll say, watch this. This is a great case. Amalei Rav Safra l'Rabbi Abba. So Rav Safra said to Rabbi Abba, Kigon anon, diad inon b'kviya diarcha. What about like us? Us, we know kviya diarcha. We'll say kviya diarcha means establishment of Rosh Chodesh. So for example, by us, remember I'm going to say, we keep Yom Tov Sheni Shel Golius, or at least I should say we did. The concept of keeping the second day Yom Tov was a result of calendrical ambiguity, right? Remember again, you all know, once upon a time we established a new month based on sighting of the new moon. Witnesses would have to come to Yerushalayim, Beis Din would have to declare the new moon, and then ultimately dispatch messengers. While dispatching messengers, the messengers often did not reach underlying communities for some amount of time, to the point that outlying communities didn't know, was it a 29-day month, a 30-day month? They just weren't sure. So because of that, they had to keep a second day of Yom Tov. So now listen to this. Rav Safra said to Rabbi Abba, listen, we know the calendar. We know the calendar. So if we go ahead and travel outside of Eretz Yisrael, do we have to keep Yom Tov Sheni? It's a good shaila, right? Do we have to keep second day Yom Tov, top of Nun Beis? B'yishuv lo avidna mipnei shini hamachlokes. So obviously, halacha l'maisa, if we're in a diaspora community on second day Yom Tov, of course we don't perform malacha in public. Look at Rashi. B'yishuv lo avidna malacha b'Yom Tov sheni chol v'nagu bo iser lo eshna le'enei mesemag. Well, so this is incredibly important. And sometimes people misunderstand this halacha. If you live in Eretz Yisrael and you come here for Yom Tov, for some strange reason, right? You come here for Yom Tov, so halacha l'maisa, you cannot do malacha publicly. This is very important. People misunderstand this halacha. You cannot do malacha publicly. Because remember, think about this, Rabbi, say, our whole sugya is about respecting minhag hamakom. So it's interesting because today, Yom Tov Sheni that we keep in the diaspora is like this hybrid between minhag and halacha. So if you're coming from Eretz Yisrael and you're coming here, you cannot perform malacha within the community. The shaila was because you're departing from the communal norm. The shaila is bamidbar mai. What about now? Midbar literally means desert, but in this context, what is he really asking? What happens if I'm not in habitation? I go out of the Jewish community. I'm out of the Jewish community. Can I perform malacha on the second day of Yom Tov? So you hear the shaila? So again, Rav Safra is saying, I know that I can't do malacha Yom Tov Sheni in the community. not because I have to observe per se Yom Tov Sheni, but more because I have to respect communal norms. Let's say I'm outside of the community, can I do malacha? Amrle, Hachiyon Rav Ami, B'Yishuv Aser, B'Midbar Mutter. Rabbi Ami said that when you are in the Yishuv, ultimately when you're in the community, you can't do any type of public malacha. Ultimately, again, because that would disparage the minhag hamakom. But if you are outside of the Jewish community, ultimately you are permitted to do so. So we'll say this discussion about what a Ben Eretz Yisrael is permitted to do on Yom Tov Sheni is quite a fascinating one that has a lot of dramatic machlokes haposkim. We definitely do make a chilik between things that are done befarhesia publicly versus things that are done bitsina privately. Again, we'll have to find a different point to be ma'arach on those halachas. Rabbi Nosson bar Asya azul mibei Rav lepumpadisa b'yom tov sheni shalat seres. We'll say, watch this. So Rabbi Nosson bar Asya went from his yeshiva mibei Rav, ultimately again to Pumpadisa on the second day of Yom Tov. On the second day of Yom Tov, second day of Shavuos. So we'll say he traveled out of the Tchum on the second day of Shavuos. So we'll say, so what happened? So the Gemara says, Shamte Rav Yosef. Ultimately, again, Rav Yosef excommunicated him because he felt that obviously he publicly disparaged the second day of Yom Tov. Why are you excommunicating him? Why don't you flog him? Give him Malchus. Adifa Avdile. I gave him the literally again the more superior punishment, which in this context means the more chamra punishment. It's true. I could have given him Malchus, but I decided to excommunicate him because ultimately, again, that is a more severe punishment. Remember again, the reason why Rav Yosef was acting in such a harsh fashion is because he felt that Rabbi Nosson bar Asya had publicly violated the communal norm. So because that, he felt he had to react in a very significant fashion, excommunicating him. So the Gemara says, how do you know that excommunication is a more chomer form of punishment than Malchus? Mimnu anegida debar bei Rav. Because in Eretz Yisrael, when they had to go ahead, if there was a Talmud Chacham who went ahead and violated something, they would go ahead and have a vote, right, regarding whether or not to administer Malchus to him. For the mimnu ashamto. But they would not go ahead and have a vote regarding excommunication. Now, what does that mean? Look at Rashi for just a moment. Mimnu anagde debar beirav talmid shesarach. If a Talmud Chacham did something inappropriate, hayu nimnin lahakoso velo lindoso. They would discuss in the Beis Din, should they go ahead and give him Malchus, but they would not discuss if they should excommunicate him. Mishum deshamta chamura v'choshishin l'kavarat Torah. And Eretz Yisrael will say, interestingly enough, if they had to punish a Talmud Chacham, they would give him Malchus, but they would not discuss excommunication. Because the concern was to excommunicate the Talmud Chacham ultimately, again, could disparage or could undermine kavarat Torah, honor given to Torah. So you see from here that excommunication is a more severe form of punishment than Malchus. Yet Rav Yosef felt compelled to go ahead and excommunicate Rav Nosson bar Asya because he felt that Rav Nosson bar Asya did to undermine the minhag hamakom, right? To undermine Yom Tov Sheni was so severe that it required this severe response. So, Ika Amri, an alternate version of this story. Ika Amri Nagde Rav Yosef. We're saying this alternate version. Rav Yosef ordered Rav Nosson bar Asya to be flogged. Lashes. Amrli Abai Nishamte. Right? Nishamte. So ultimately, again, Abai says to Rav Yosef, why are you flogging? Why don't you excommunicate? It's just the reverse. Why don't you excommunicate him? Ultimately, again, we excommunicate those who disparage the second day of Yom Tov outside of Eretz Yisrael. We'll see the sugya. I mean, this is not a Pesachim sugya, but the sugya of Yom Tov Sheni Shal Gaz is really quite fascinating. And you see Chazal's like incredible insistence on maintaining this halacha, even with even with a fixed calendar, right? Remember again, today we have no calendrical ambiguity, nothing. We know exactly when everything is. We know exactly when everything will be. There's no ambiguity. Yet again, you see Chazal's concern. What the Gemara says is Shemeyachsir davar lekilkulo, a general concern of Gentile intervention in our calendar, and a concern that if we don't keep Yom Tov Sheni outside of Eretz Yisrael, Chas v'Shalom, we run the risk of losing sight of the Yom Tovim. So that's why you see a severity. So Abai says to Rav Yosef, why didn't you flog Rav Nassan bar Asya? After all, again, because Rav and Shmuel both say, Menadin al Shnei Yom Tovim shal Golios, we excommunicate if somebody disrespects or violates Yom Tov Sheni. Amrlei Hanimi Nishta Alma, to which Rav Yosef responded, that's only a regular person. Hacha Surba Mirabanon. Here, we are dealing with a Talmud Chacham. The Gemara says, because the Tavi Le Avdi, and because whenever you have to punish a Talmud Chacham, you always find for him the most favorable punishment. They both say, let's understand what this means. This is what Rashi was mentioning before. The issue whenever you have to punish a Talmud Chacham is, remember, a Talmud Chacham is always bigger than himself. What do I mean by that? The Talmud Chacham is the ambassador of Torah. The Talmud Chacham is the ambassador of the Ribbon Shalom. So what you do to him, ultimately again reflects back on Torah. Both say that's why the Talmud Chacham has greater level of responsibility for his actions. This meaning this cuts both ways. The Talmud Chacham is judged more severely because he is the ambassador of Torah, and because ultimately again he is the ambassador of the Ribbon Shalom. That's why you see so many Ma'amari Chazal. The Talmidei Chachamim are held responsible for even the slightest of infractions. But on the flip side, when he's done something wrong and you want to go ahead and punish him, so the Gemara says, according to this version, the Gemara suggests that according to this version, we're going to give him the most machmir form of punishment. The ma'arava mimnu anagarata debar beirav v'lo mimnu ashamta. Ultimately, again, because in Eretz Yisrael, they went ahead and they voted regarding the lashing of a Talmud Chacham, but they did not vote regarding excommunication. So you see from here that excommunication is considered to be a more severe form. So we'll say the two different versions. So the shaila ultimately was, did Rabbi Nassan bar Asya did Rav Yosef administer the highest form of punishment, not the highest form of punishment? Okay, those are the two versions. But we'll say, but bottom line, the takeaway message is, don't violate minhag hamakom. This is incredibly important. The Gemara drilling over and over and over. It is true that your minhagim follow you where you go, but at least on a public level, when you find yourself in a particular place, so halacha l'maisa, you must adopt the minhag hamakom, at least on a public level. What you could do privately, or what you could do outside of the confines of the city is a different kind of discussion, but at least publicly, one is bound by the minhag hamakom. Incredible. Kiyot sebo. So most remember again, the next case in the Mishnah was a very interesting situation about a person who goes out and takes peros shviyas, shemitah produce, from one city to another. So we'll say, let's talk about this in just a moment. There's an interesting halacha, the halacha of biur. Biur literally means as follows, that you are permitted to store shemitah produce in your home, right? Also, remember again, we know, basic halachas of shemitah, can't work the land, can't do commerce with shemitah produce. You are permitted to store shemitah produce in your home as long as that same produce, same type of produce, is readily available for the chayas, for the animals in the field. So as long as it's available to the animals outdoors, you are permitted to store it. The moment it is no longer available to animals, you can't store it in your house. That's the halacha of biur. To the point where we'll say that, let's say again, I'm storing shemitah apples in my house, and there are no longer any shemitah apples available on the trees, I must remove it from my home. Now there's a machlokes exactly what biur is. Does biur mean destruction? Or does biur just mean you take it out and you make it hefker? That's a machlokes. We'll go with the approach that says you just have to take it out and make it hefker. Which also means all you need to do is take it out of your house, make it hefker. Technically speaking, what can you do after that? You can take it back. But there is an obligation to remove it from your home and actively make it ownerless. That's the concept of biur. So remember again, The Mishnah spoke about a case where I go from a city where, let's say, produce is available out in the fields to a city where produce is not available out in the fields, or vice versa. Now, I remember Rabbi Yehuda had a very cryptic statement. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, say v'havei lecha, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, say v'havei lecha afata. Rabbi Yehuda had this statement, you could also go out and get for yourself. So we'll say, so it's not immediately clear what Rabbi Yehuda was saying. This is what we're going to focus on the sugya. So we'll say, here we go. Says the Gemara, Yotzei ba'amalach perishvius. V'lesle Rabbi Yehuda, hadis na nosnin alav chumrei hamakom shiyatzim misham, v'chumrei hamakom shehalach l'sham. So we'll say, does Rabbi Yehuda not subscribe to the idea that in general, when you go to a new city, pretty much you have both chumras. You have the chumras of the minhagim of your hometown, but you also have the chumras of the minhagim of your present location, to which the Gemara says no. Amar Rav Shisha Reid Ravidi, Milsa Achrisi Kam Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, in fact, is saying something different than the Mishnah. Also, remember again, the Tanakama in the Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa, pretty much, if you go from, let's say, your hometown to city A, right, home to city A, and let's say, in one of those towns, and you travel with Shemitah produce, and in one of those towns, either one of those towns, the Shemitah produce is no longer available, now you're chayiv to get rid of it from your home. You're chayiv to do beer, right? Because you're supposed to think about this. The Mishnah is just saying, remember, whenever you travel from point A to point B, you take the chumras of your hometown and the chumras of the new town. So from a Shemitah perspective, what that means is, if I'm transporting Shemitah produce, and in one of those two towns, the Shemitah produce is no longer available, I'm chayiv for what? For beer. I'm chayiv to go ahead and now get rid of the produce. So Rabbi Yehuda said, no, you can go ahead and get your own. So the Gemara says, what does this mean? So here we go. Amar Rav Shisha Reid Ravidi Milsa Achrisi Kam Rabbi Yehuda. Here we go. Vachi Kamar. This is what Rabbi Yehuda was saying. Omi makom shelo kalu le makom shelo kalu. Rabbi, so listen to this case. Let's say I'm traveling from my home to city A. And let's say we'll say in both locations, the Shemitah produce is still available. Good news, right? Baruch Hashem. I'm traveling with apples, with Shemitah apples, and both in my hometown and in city A where I'm traveling to, Shemitah apples are still available in the field. No problem for me to keep it in my home. Vishama, then what happens? I travel from my home to city A. I get to city A. Vishama shekalu bimkomo. And now I hear that the produce, the apples, there are no longer apples available in the field in my hometown. So I'm no longer in my hometown. I traveled to city A already, right? When I left my hometown, apples were available outside. I get to city A, Baruch Hashem, apples are still available outside. Then I hear that back in my hometown, apples are no longer available out in the field. So what does the Tanakama say? Chayiv levayer. You have to do beer. We'll say, why do you have to do beer? Why do you have to do beer? Because remember, whenever you travel from your home to another city, you take the chumras of both places, of your home and of your new city. So now again, in my hometown, they can no longer keep apples in the house, so I have to do beer, even though now I'm in city A. Rabbi Yehuda says, why? Why? Rabbi Yehuda says, why do I have to go ahead and do beer on the apples? I could tell the people from my hometown, you guys could also come here to city A, and there's plenty of apples available outside. In other words, why should I be bound? Why should I be bound what's happening back in my hometown when I'm in city A, and apples are still available in city A? I can easily send word to the members of my hometown and say, you guys could also come here and still keep apples in your home. The Gemara says, and in city A, there are still apples in the field. Good. So the Memra, Rabbi Yehuda the Kula Kamar. Now, we'll say now, what this makes it sound like is Rabbi Yehuda is actually espousing a Kula. He's actually espousing a leniency. That whereas the Tanakama would say, in this case, I left my hometown, I went to city A. When I left home, apples were still available in the field. I get to city A, apples are available in the field. Then I get word, apples are no longer available in my hometown. Tanakama says, you have to do beer. And now, it sounds like what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is, no, you don't have to do beer. Why not? Because I could send word to the members of my hometown, hey guys, come to city A, plenty of apples available for everyone out in the field. So Rabbi Yehuda is saying, L'kula, V'am Rabbi Elazar, L'am Rabbi Yehuda, L'chumra. But one second, Rabbi Elazar says, Rabbi Yehuda holds L'chumra, not L'kula, Ela Eifoch. Rather, you have to switch around the two shitas. Eino chayiv levayer. In fact, it's the Tanakama who holds that you are not obligated to do beer. In this case that we're talking about, where again, I go from my hometown to city A. When I left, in both places, apples were available in the field. I get to city A, I settle down, I get word from my hometown. Apples are no longer available in the field. The Tanakama says you don't have to do beer, because you can tell the members of your hometown, hey guys, just come to city A, plenty of apples. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, say va'avelecha af ata mehecha daisinu v'hakalur. Rabbi Yehuda will say, well, go out and try to bring apples from your hometown. You can't, because they're no longer available. Therefore, halacha l'maisa, you have to do beer. So we'll say Rabbi Yehuda is the one who's saying that halacha l'maisa, you are bound by the realities of your hometown as well as by your present location. And since in your hometown, halacha l'maisa, apples are no longer available, you are obligated to do beer, even though now you are residing in city A. But we'll say, obviously, I just want to point out, I'm sure you know this. This presupposes, of course, that your intention is to go home, right? That's what this presupposes. Right? Obviously, if you moved from home to city A, and city A is your new home, then of course this discussion doesn't apply. This whole concept that you are bound by chumrei makom sheyatsa misham ultimately assumes you're going back. Abaye says no. The olam kediktani. Abaye says no. Let's go back to the way we had it before. That really the Tanakama was the one who was being machmir, and Rabbi Yehuda was being mekil. Vachi kamar. That's what it means to say. Omi makom shalo kalu limakom shekalu v'chziran limkoman va'adayin lo kalu. Both said, listen to this case. This is a great case. What's the case? Says Abaye. The case is where I left home. Right now, in my hometown, there are still apples available in the field, right? The trees are laden with apples, Baruch Hashem. I now go to city, and so I take apples, and I go with me now to city A. Now we'll say, now when I get to city A, what happens? There are no longer any apples available in city A. And then what happens? V'chzir koman. I go back home. I say, I'm not staying in city A. I go back home. And what comes with me when I go back home? What comes with me? My apples. I always take my apples everywhere, right? So I go back home and have the apples. So we'll say, so now you see what's happened? I've gone from a place, my hometown, where apples are available. I went to city A, where apples are not available. And now I came back with all the same produce back to my hometown. And in my hometown, va'adayin lo kalu. And in my hometown, apples are still available. So we'll say, now what's the halacha? So the Gemara says, Eino chayev levai. The Tanakama says, you're not chayev to do beer. Right? After all, again, you're back home. In your hometown, ultimately, again, apples are still available. You're not chayav to do beer. Get ready for this. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Tzei v'havei lecha af ata mehecha daisinu v'akol. Rabbi Yehuda says, yes, you are. You're chayav to do beer. Why are you chayav to do beer? Because ultimately, again, you took that produce to city A. What's the status in city A? The status in city A, there are no apples available. So if Rabbi Yehuda says, to go try to bring out these apples from the place where you came from, which was in this case city A, the apples are no longer available in city A, and therefore you must do beer. So we'll say, I just want to point out, this is like an extreme case, because in this case, you're back home. So Tanakama says, listen, once you're back home, you're back home. Right? That's it. We're done. Right? Once you're back home, you're only bound by one set of minhagim, which is the minhagim of your home. It's amazing. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Halacha l'maisa, once you travel, and again, because this is a produce issue, once you travel with that produce to another location, even once you bring that produce back home, that produce is governed by the chumras of all the places where you've traveled. So it's really quite dramatic. So halacha l'maisa, Rabbi Yehuda will say, even though now you're back home, and back home the apples are readily available in the field, you have to do beer. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Maskev Ravashi Rabbi Yehuda. So Ravashi Rabbi Yehuda, that doesn't make any sense. Atu agava dechamra kaltinhu. Ultimately, again, literally it means, do the apples get absorbed on the back of the donkey? Now, both say, look at Rashi for just a moment. It's in the intermediate wide lines of Rashi. Third line in Gabo dechamra kaltinu Gabo shel chamar shechnisan l'sach osa makom hachamar kaltan b'chumrei osa makom shel yuchal achzirin ot halo gadlu sham v'nochlun sham. So literally, again, what they say is, does the donkey when the donkey brings in the produce to city A, does that make it city A produce? In other words, both side, what the Gemara is saying, what the or Rav Ashi is saying to Rabbi Yehuda is, that doesn't make any sense. This produce didn't grow in city A, nor was it consumed in city A. So why would it be bound by the Shemitah status of produce in city A? Well, so remember again, this is a different case. In this case, the produce grew at home. I write, it's available at home. I took it with me to city A, and then I brought it back home. And yet Rabbi Yehuda is saying that because in city A, apples are no longer available in the field, even though you brought the produce back home, you have to do beer. To which ultimately, again, Rav Ashi says to Rabbi Yehuda, that doesn't make any sense. What shaykhus does this produce have to city A, other than the fact that it was on the back of the donkey in city A? This produce grew in my hometown, so its Shemitah status should be determined by the hometown. So the Gemara says, "Ela Amar Rav Ashi beplukta dahani tanoi." Rather, what you have to say is that the machlokes Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda is rooted in the following machlokes. This non very interesting case. Hakovish losha kivashin b'chavis achos. We'll say if you're kovish literally means like you're pickling, right? Imagine for a moment that you're pickling 3 different types of vegetables in one barrel. Now, both saying. Now, the interesting case over here is as follows. Now, remember, we're talking about a Shemitah year. So remember again, the same halacha of beer. You are allowed to go ahead and keep produce inside your home on a Shemitah year as long as that produce is readily available in the field. So we'll say, so imagine this case. You have 3 different types of vegetables. Whatever it is. 3 different types, A, B, and C. You're pickling them together in a barrel. So watch this. So we'll say, so what's the halacha? Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Ochlan ala Rishon. I will say, now, what's going to be the problem? The problem is the shas beer for those 3 vegetables are going to be at 3 different times. Because you're both say, remember again, so cucumbers are available until X, and cabbage is available until Y, and celery is available until Z. Right? So both say everything is available until a different time. So both say the underlying issue over here is we assume that when you pickle items together, they, to a certain degree, become like one comprehensive unit. So the shaila is, when is the shas beer for these vegetables that are being pickled together? So Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Eliezer says, Ochlan ala Rishon. They're all governed by the first shas beer, by the earliest shas beer. So as soon as the first vegetable hits its shas beer, that governs the rest of them. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, we govern them by the latest shas beer. Rabbi Gamliel Omer Kol Shekala Mina Min Asadi Yivar Mina Min Achavis. Rabbi Gamliel says, even though they're being pickled together, and therefore to a certain degree we look at them as one unit, for beer purposes, the halacha will be that what? Each one is reckoned independently. So I will say, so what you would have to do is, the moment that the shas beer for cucumbers comes along, what do you have to do? You got to pull the cucumbers out of the pickling barrel. And then the moment that ultimately, again, shas beer for cabbage comes along, you got to pull out cabbage. Each one is still governed by its own independent shas beer. V'halacha kidvarov. And ultimately, again, the halacha follows, the Gemara says, Rabbi Gamliel. So Rashi points out over here, if you look at Rashi, it's actually the first of the widest line in Rashi. Rashi says over here, V'tana demasnisin Rabbi Yehuda b'hapligi. The Gemara wants to suggest over here, or I should say Rav Ashi wants to suggest that this machlokis is machlokis Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakamo. Rashi says, V'tana demasnisin Rabbi Yehuda b'hapligi. The Tanakama serve like Rabbi Yeshua, to make your Tanakamo hold like Rabbi Yeshua, and ultimately again, and Rabbi Yehuda will hold like Rabbi Gamliel. Okay, fine. Ravina says, no, not true. Not true. In fact, Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda Tanakamo is the Machlokes of the following Tanoim. How so? This nan, Ochlin, in another interesting case, Ochlin bitmarim ad shechala acharon shebet soar. We'll say again, all Shemitah cases, you are permitted to go ahead and eat dates. Rashi points out over here, B'chol Eretz Yehuda. This is Dafka talking about the tribal area of Yehuda, which we'll discuss in just a moment. You could eat dates until the last date is finished in the city of Tzoar. Tzoar was an area in Yehuda. So we'll say what's unique about Tzoar. Look at Rashi. The last Rashi on the Daf. She'ir HaTmorim. Ultimately, again, Tzoar was known as the city of dates. Utnan lekamon shalosh aratzos lebir shein bnei Yehuda ochlim mishekalu bechol eretz Yehuda v'av bishlo kalu begalil ava ochlin heim b'Yehuda v'afilu makom shekala ad shiich lamakom achron shebechol eretz Yehuda lefi shechaya kisheina motzes kan holeches lamakom acher v'mis parneses. We'll say we're going to see this in just a moment. It's going to be on Amud Beis. Eretz Yisrael is considered to be divided up into three different areas. The halachos of beer are governed by area. So, for example, Yehuda is one of the areas. So we'll say the halacha is that you are permitted to go ahead and eat, and we're going to see that each area is divided up into three quadrants. So, for example, for the tribal area of Yehuda, you could eat produce or store produce in Yehuda as long as the produce is available in one of the quadrants of Yehuda. But what happens in Yehuda is not impacted by what happens in Galil. We'll see, for example. So the Gemara therefore says, halacha l'maisa over here, that's what? That halacha l'maisa, you could eat dates, you could store dates in Yehuda as long as dates are available in Soar. Right? So Soar apparently was one of the areas in Yehuda that was able to maintain dates until for the latest amount of time. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, Amud Beis, Ochlin ad shel bein hakipin, vein ochlin al she bein hashitzin. So interestingly, Rav Shimon Gamliel says that's true. You could go ahead and consume dates as long as they are available between the branches, but not when they are available between the thorns. So what does this mean? So remember again, dates would often fall off the tree, right? Would often fall off their clusters. So dates would sometimes get caught in between the branches, or sometimes they would get caught in the thorny protrusions towards the bottom of the tree. As long as there are dates available in the branches, it's considered that dates are readily available for the animals of the field. But if the dates are not available in the branches, are only available in the thorns, that's not considered to be as if the dates are readily available. Look at Rashi for just a moment. So Rashi says over here, Derech the tap Rashi on Amud Beis, Ochlin al shel ben akibin, Derech the kolam lios beikar and kotzim sabib, v'hainu shitzim. Uminadeka asma lamala alin shalo asuin kisidron. We'll say skip down a little bit. Umas nisim. See that? So, remember again, the Gemara is suggesting now that this machlokes is machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Tanakama. Umas nisim hakikama. This is what our Mishnah means to say. Hakikama Tanakama. Kala legamrei. Af mi bein hashitzin chayiv levair. The Tanakama of our Mishnah would hold that halacha l'maisa, even if the dates are readily available in the thorns, it's still considered to be readily available, and it's only once they're no longer available in the thorns that the beer kicks in. Aval kolu min hakipin v'adayin yesh b'shitzin eno chayiv levair. Rabbi Huda Omer tzei v'avelecha af ata mimokom haroi litlan v'lo tinsa l'chumra am Rabbi Huda. So we'll say ultimately again, the Gemara wants to suggest over here that perhaps the machlokes Rabbi Huda and Tanakama in our Mishnah is this very machlokes. At what point in time are dates no longer readily available? The Tanakama would hold only if the dates are in the branches. Rabbi Huda would say even if the dates halacha l'maisa are available in the thorns, that's still called readily available. Okay, so we'll say, so just trying to figure out different ways to touch up the machlokes Rabbi Huda and the Tanakama in the Brisa. So we now have effectively three different approaches. We have Abaye, we have Rav Ashi, and ultimately again then the previous approaches as well, as that were the case, the nafkamina case in Rabbi Huda and the Rabbanon. Good. So we'll say now the Gemara mentioned this concept ultimately of three different areas, three different regions for Shemitah purposes. And I was going to expand on this a little bit. And this is really quite fascinating. Shalosh aratzos lebir. Both say there are three different lands when it comes to beer. So both say what this means is as follows: that the halachos of Shemitah are governed by three different regions. The three different regions are Yehuda, ve'Iver Hayarden, ve'Galil. Yehuda, Iver Hayarden, Galil. So we'll say, what does this mean? V'shalosh aratzos b'chol achos v'achos. And in each of these areas, Yehuda, Iver Hayarden, and the Galil, there are three different quadrants in each of these areas. And therefore what? V'lama amru shalosh haratzos labir. So I'll say, what exactly is the ramification of this? I'm saying that there are three different areas in Eretz Yisrael for beer purposes. She'yihu ochlin b'chol achas v'achos ad she'echala ha'acharon sheba. We'll say what this tells you is as follows. So remember again, in in Yehuda, you have quadrant 1, 2, and 3. Galil, quadrant 1, 2, and 3. Ivra Yardin, quadrant 1, 2, and 3. Now, what's the importance of this? Remember, we're fully focused on beer. Right? So remember, again, I will say the halachos of beer say you can store Shemitah produce in your home as long as that produce is readily available for the animals of the field. So how do we gauge that? So first of all, number one, it's not gauged in Eretz Yisrael in totality. It's gauged regionally. So Yehuda will be its own independent entity for beer. Galil, own independent entity for beer. Ever Hayardin, own independent entity for beer. And even in that, Rabbosai, it could be that in 2/3 of Yehuda, produce is not available. That's okay. As long as produce is available at least where? At least in one quadrant, at least in one area of Yehuda, that is going to be enough not to trigger the obligation of beer. So the Gemara says, from where do we know this concept? From where do we know this concept? Rashi says, "The ochlin biYehuda ad sheyechala achron shebeshalosh araso sheba, aval in ochlin biYehuda ayde osa shebegala." So we'll say, how do I know that Yehuda is governed by its areas, and that you can eat in Yehuda as long as produce is available somewhere in Yehuda, but yet you can't eat in Yehuda if what? If produce is no longer available in Yehuda, but is available in the Galil. From where do I know this concept? Amrakra. Because the pasuk says, well, so I read the pasuk in its entirety. Oh, this is really it. So speaking about the Shemitah year, that during the Shemitah year, ultimately the produce of the land will be available to the animals to eat. So the Gemara makes an amazing observation. Behemoths and chayas are two different things. Behemoths are domestic animals. Chayas are non-domestic animals. So the Torah says that the Shemitah produce should be available for consumption to the behemoths and the chayas. Listen to this incredible limud. What does it teach me? Kol zman shechayo chelas min asada. As long as the particular produce is available to the chaya in the field, which means it's available we'll call it in the wild, right? It's available, is the right in the wild? Yeah, right? It's available in the wild, right? It's available in the field. So ultimately, again, then ultimately, again, you're permitted to go ahead and feed it to the animal in your home, which will also mean you're allowed to store the produce in your home. However, but once the produce is no longer available to the animal in the field, then ultimately, again, then you are no longer permitted to store it for your behema in the home. I will say this is the halacha of beer. It's incredible. This is the halacha of beer. This is the halacha of beer. When it's available to the chaya in the field, you could store it for the behema in the house. But when it's no longer available for the chaya in the field, you cannot. This is a storage issue. This is a storage issue. You cannot store it for your animal inside of the home. Ugamiri, and I will say we have a tradition. This is fascinating. De'ein chaya shebe Yehuda gedela pero shebe Galil. Let's say an animal that grows up in Yehuda cannot be sustained through produce from the Galil. Ve'ein chaya shebe Galil gedela al pero shebe Yehuda. An animal from the Galil cannot grow up or cannot be sustained from the fruit ultimately again in Yehuda. So we know that since the Torah makes the whole ability ultimately to store produce in your home based on availability to the animals, to the chayes in the field, and we know, Gemiri doesn't mean like we have some type of esoteric tradition. Gemiri means we know, we see this. Yehuda animals eat Yehuda produce. They don't eat Galil produce. Galil animals eat Galil produce, not Eivra Yardin produce. And Eivra Yardin animals only eat Eivra Yardin produce. Therefore, by definition, you see that Eretz Yisrael is divided up into three areas for beer purposes, which also tells you that Eretz Yisrael, this is the beauty of Eretz Yisrael. See, they will say, if the animals of Eretz Yisrael have to be sustained from their particular chelik in Eretz Yisrael, it tells you that if every animal has a chelik in Eretz Yisrael, then imagine what we have, right? Every Jew also has his own chelik in Eretz Yisrael. And ultimately, again, your chelik is your chelik, my chelik is my chelik doesn't encroach on yours, and your chelik doesn't encroach on mine. That's what the Mishnah Abba says, that one of the miracles that occurred in Yerushalayim was V'lo Amar Adam Tsarli Hamakom. Person never said, there's not enough room for me, Sha'olin B'Yushalayim. See, I will say, see, sometimes we think in life that there's a pie, and if you get a bigger slice of the pie, it's less for me. So first of all, it's not true, because at the end of the day, not only is it not true, but we don't even share the same pie. You have your pie, I have my pie. Halabai, you should get all of your pie. I'm happy for you to get it, and you should be happy for me if I get all of my pie, because if I get more, it doesn't impact you. You have your parnasa, I have my parnasa. And in Eretz Yisrael, it's the same thing. Every single Jew has his chelik in Eretz Yisrael. It's an incredible thing. So if the Chayis have their own chelik, like the Chayis of Yehuda don't eat the produce of Galil. They have their own thing. V'lo amar adam sarli hamakom. And Eretz Yisrael, there's no such thing that if you have more, I have less. Right? Each of us has our own chelik in the land. Incredible. So we'll say, but I just want to point out, this is a very dramatic Gemara, because this is the source for beer, that's Aleph, and B, Beis, you begin to see that for beer purposes, there are three geographic areas. There's Yehuda, Ever Hayardin, and Galil. In each of these areas, there are three different quadrants in each of these areas, and the halachas of beer say as long as produce is available somewhere in Yehuda, even if not in all the places, you don't have to do beer. So on and so forth with the other places as well. Tanabanan, Perush Yatsu, we'll say these are great cases. Perush Yatsu Me'eretz Yisrael, we'll say, I would urge you, fold the flap down on your page on this, because it's a Shemitah year this coming year. And we'll say, Me'eretz Hashem, we will be able to travel to Eretz Yisrael. B'sha'a tova u'mitzlachos. So we'll say, so again, these are great sugyas, because these are the Shemitah sugyas that are going to come up. Ten Rabbanan, Pero Shiyatzu Me'eretz Yisrael l'chutz la'aretz. Well, this is this interesting case. What happens if you transported Shemitah produce from Eretz Yisrael to chutz la'aretz? Now, I will say, the legality of doing such a thing is a different discussion, right? But let's say you did it. You transported Peiros Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz, Shemitah produce. So I will say, so now what happens? Now, what's the halacha? Misbarin b'chol makom shein. We'll say when the shas beer comes, you have to get rid of them from your house. So I take Shemitah produce from Eretz Yisrael to Baltimore. Now again, what happens? Apples are no longer available in the field in Eretz Yisrael. So I have to do beer. But I don't have to bring the produce back to Eretz Yisrael to do beer. I could just do beer wherever I am. Rav Shimon Elazar Omer Yachzeru L'Mkomen V'Yizbaru. Wow. Rav Shimon Elazar says, no, you have to take the Shemitah produce back to Eretz Yisrael and do beer back in Eretz Yisrael. Incredible. We'll say, where does he get that from? Shneimar Ba'artzecha. Ultimately, again, because the pasuk says Ba'artzecha. Right, the pasuk says, so you have to do beer in Eretz. So Shimon Elazar says, the Gemara says, but 1 second, we use that fixe, but we already used that pasuk for the drasha of beer like we just saw before. Kari Bey Ba'aretz Ba'artzecha. It could have just said Ba'aretz, but instead it says Ba'artzecha. You could do a double drasha. Inami me Asher Ba'artzecha. Or he darshans Asher. So we'll say, fundamental machlokes. You take Shemitah produce from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz. It's now the Shas beer. Where can you do beer? Tanakama says you could do beer in Chutz La'aretz. You don't have to bring the produce back. Shmuel says, no, you have to bring the produce back. Incredible. Rav Safra, Nafek Me'eretz Yisrael Chutz La'aretz. Rav Safra went from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz. Hava Bahadei Garba de Chamra de Shvius. What did he bring with Rabbi? He brought with him Shemitah wine. So Rabbi say, I want to be clear. You could get Shemitah wine in Chutz La'aretz also, but in general, if you're getting Shemitah wine, it's Otzar Bezdin. That's something very different. Very, very. Now again, you still have to finish every single drop of Otzar. You should finish every single drop of every wine in general. It's just a good way to live. Just a better way to live. Now I'll say, but again, we're talking over here now, Mamish Shemitah. So he went ahead and Rav Safra brought a barrel of Shemitah wine from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz. So what happened? Lavu Ba'adei Rav Huna Rav Ika. Rav Huna, the son of Rav Ika, and Rav Kana were accompanying Rav Safra on the journey. Amr Lahus, Rav Safra said to them, Ika d'shmiya leminei Rabbi Avo. Did either of you hear from your Rabbi Avo? Halacha Reb Shimon Elazar alo. Does the halacha for Reb Shimon Elazar or not? So you both say this is obviously very important for Safra, because Safra has a barrel of wine. The Shas beer, I guess, was approaching, so he wanted to know, what do I do? What do I do? Do I need to go ahead and bring the wine back to Eretz Yisrael and do beer there? Or can I do beer right where I am now, in Chutz La'aretz? So Amalei Rav Kahana, Hachi Am Rabbi Avo. This Rav Kahana said, Rabbi Avo told me, Halacha Reb Shimon Elazar. Halacha Reb Shimon Elazar. You have to take the produce back to Eretz Yisrael to do beer. So the Gemara says, Amalei Rav Huna, Amalei Reb Shimon Elazar. Amalei Rav Huna, Beid Rab Ika, Hachi Am Rabbi Avo. Ein halacha Reb Shimon Elazar. So we'll say, so now there's a machlokes. There was a machlokes amongst Rav Safra's travel companions. One said Rabbi Avo said halacha follows Reb Shimon Elazar, and one opinion said halacha does not follow Reb Shimon Elazar. Amar Rav Safra, nakot haklala drafuna biadcha. You know what? I'm going to take this principle of Rav Huna in your hand. The dayik v'gamar shmaisesami pumei dirabei. So ultimately, again, Sort of Safra said, the truth is, I'm going to go with Rav Huna. Because Rav Huna was as meticulous of retelling these statements, the teachings of his Rebbe, as Rachba of Pumpadisa was. Because what did Rachba of Pumpadisa say? Dam Rachba Am Rabbi Yehuda Harabayis Stav Kafel Haya. Plus, we actually saw this Gemara, right? Harabayis was double benched. Right, in the area around the Azara, there were double layer of benches. Stav lifnim stav. One row of benches inside of another row of benches. Kari alei Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef said, just before we go on, so Rav Safra chose to go with the approach of Rav Huna. Right, so ultimately, again, Rav Huna said that Rabbi Avo said, "In halacha Reb Shimon Elazar," that the halacha does not from Shimon Elazar, that you do not have to take peros shvius back to Eretz Yisrael, ultimately again for beer purposes. And Rav Safra is saying we're going to go like Rav Huna, because Rav Huna was as meticulous of retelling the teachings of his Rebbe as Rachba was. So the Gemara says, Kari alei Rav Yosef, Ami ba'aso yishal, umaklo yagidlo. So both say you get a little bit of a twist on the pasuk over here. The pasuk says, Ami be'eto yishal. My nation, they ask counsel from wood, umaklo yagidlo, and his staff will tell over. Hidarshan kalamekilo magidlo. People generally tend to side with the more lenient opinions, right? Kalamekil magidlo, the more kula dekashita usually speaks to people. So in this particular case, the kula was that the halacha does not follow Reb Shimon Elazar, and Abba say that is indeed how he paskin. So halacha lamaisa, if you take peros shavias out of Eretz Yisrael, and the Shas beer arrives, you are obligated to do beer with that produce even outside of Eretz Yisrael, but halacha l'mais, you are not obligated to take it back to Eretz Yisrael for beer. You do beer wherever you are. Shkach, we'll stop here and pick up here tomorrow.